1 year after Talani first observed a human child watering a stone, she stood in the observation room and composed her final report. The screens around her showed a transformed world. Verdant 7 had survived the new seeds from Earth had taken root in the contaminated soil and grown into healthy crops that now filled the greenhouses with green life. The colonists moved through their settlement with energy and purpose, rebuilding what the blight had nearly destroyed, and in the center of the colony, the stone garden had become something no one could have predicted. 214 stones, Vrethik reported, checking his data tablet, placed by colonists, volunteers, and visitors from 6 different species. 6 species. Talani repeated with amazement. Word has spread through the galactic community, Vrethik explained. Ships passing through this sector have begun stopping at Verdant 7 specifically to see the garden. Many of them leave stones of their own. Talani watched as a group of Narration tourists approached the garden on the surface below. They moved slowly, respectfully, their silver skin shimmering with emotional resonance. Each of them carried a small stone from their homeworld. When did you become so interested in the garden's popularity? Talani asked her colleague. Vrethik's mandibles clicked in what she had learned to recognize as embarrassment. I have been maintaining records, he said defensively. Purely for scientific purposes, of course, on the surface. Little Yuna was performing her morning ritual, just as she had every day for the past year. She was 8 years old now, taller than she had been when this all began. But a dedication to her original stone had never wavered. Other children gathered around her, along with adults who had made the pilgrimage to this spot a part of their daily routine. Captain Mira was there. Having decided to stay on Verdant 7 rather than return to Earth, Dr. Beek-Jasu stood beside Commander Deho, the two of them holding hands in a way that suggested their relationship had grown beyond professional respect, and off to one side, alone but somehow still connected, stood a tall Kethrai figure. Is that who I think it is? Talani asked. Vrethik did not answer, but his compound eyes fixed on the screen with an intensity that told her everything she needed to know. The figure on the surface was Vrethik himself. He had begun visiting the garden openly 2 months ago, no longer hiding his participation from the humans or his fellow observers. He had told Talani that the humans did not question his presence or ask him to explain. They simply made room for him in their circle and continued. The ritual, your report is due to Elder Morvith today. Vrethik reminded her. I know. What are you going to tell him? Talani looked at her data, at the emotional readings and behavioral analyses and cultural observations she had collected over 12 months. Then she looked at the screen where humans and aliens stood together in a garden of stones. I'm going to tell him the truth, she said. She began to dictate species 7421, designation human, operates according to a logic system that the Galactic Council has never encountered. She began. This system is not based on evidence or probability or material outcomes. It is based on meaning. Humans invest belief into things not because evidence supports that belief, but because the act of believing creates value, she continued. They water stones not because stones can become seeds, but because the watering makes them into the kind of beings who do not give up. This behavior, which we initially classified as cognitive failure, is in fact a survival adaptation of extraordinary power, Talani said. It allows humans to maintain hope in hopeless situations, to build communities around shared purpose, to inspire loyalty and sacrifice in others. When a human child waters a stone, she's not making an error, Talani concluded. She's making a declaration. I will care for this. I will commit to this. I will believe in this, regardless of what logic tells me. And somehow, impossibly, that declaration changes the universe around her. She saved the report and transmitted it to the Galactic Council. Do you think Morvith will understand? Vrethik asked. I do not know, Telani admitted. But I think it matters that we tried to explain. Just as it matters that Yuna waters her stone. A chime indicated that a response had already arrived from Elder Morvith. Telani opened it with trembling fingers. The message was brief. Report received. It read, Classification of species 7421 has been changed from cognitively deficient to requires further study. I am allocating additional resources to human observation. Also, please send coordinates for the stone garden. I wish to visit. Telani read the message twice before she allowed herself to smile on the surface below. The morning ritual was ending. The children scattered to their lessons, the adults to their work, the visitors to their ships, but Yuna remained by her original stone for a moment longer. Her father knelt beside her. 1 year, Deho said softly. You have been watering this stone for 1 year. I know, Yuna replied. Has it grown? The child looked at her stone. Smooth and gray, and exactly the same size it had been 12 months ago. Then she looked at the garden around it, at the hundreds of stones placed by hundreds of hands, at the paths worn into the dirt by thousands of feet. Yes, she said. It has grown so much. Deho wrapped his arm around his daughter and held her close. I think you are right, he said. They walked back toward the colony together. Leaving the garden behind later that evening, Commander Deho would return with a simple wooden sign that he had carved himself. He planted it at the entrance to the garden, where every visitor would see it. The sign read, Where stones learn to grow, in the observation station above. Vrethik was preparing for his journey back to the Kethray homeworld. His assignment on Verdant 7 had ended, and his people expected him to return, but as he packed his few belongings, he found himself holding a small gray stone. It was the stone he had placed in the garden 9 months ago. He had dug it up that morning during his final visit, unable to leave it behind. Are you taking that with you? Telani asked from the doorway. Vrethik looked at the stone in his hand. It had not changed at all. It was still just a rock, but somehow, holding it made him feel connected to a garden on a distant world, to a child who never gave up, to a year of watching humans transform impossible belief into tangible strength. Yes, he said. I do not know what I will do with it, but I cannot leave it behind. Telani nodded as if this made perfect sense, and perhaps it did. Perhaps that was the greatest lesson the humans had taught them. Some things do not need to make sense. They just need to matter, and this mattered the stone. The garden, the child who started it all, they mattered more than logic could ever explain. 9 months after Telani first observed Yuna watering her stone, a ship appeared in the sky above Verdant 7. The colonists had been surviving on emergency rations for weeks now. The blight had destroyed everything they had tried to grow, and the food reserves were nearly exhausted. Children no longer ran through the streets. Adults moved slowly to conserve energy. Only one ritual continued without change. Every morning, Yuna and her fellow believers gathered at the stone garden to water their rocks. Telani had stopped trying to explain this behavior to Vrethik. The Kethray scholar had returned to the observation station after Elder Morvith's departure, ostensibly to help compile the final report, but Telani had noticed something strange in her colleague's behavior over the past few weeks. He spent hours watching the stone garden ritual, his compound eyes fixed on the screen with an intensity that seemed more personal than scientific. The ship is broadcasting human identification codes, Vrethik announced as the vessel descended through the atmosphere. It appears to be a supply transport from Earth. Earth, Telani repeated with surprise. But Earth is over 200 light years away. 217, Vrethik confirmed. At maximum speed, the journey would take nearly 3 months, which meant the ship had launched when the blight was barely 2 weeks old, which meant humans on Earth had heard about the crisis and immediately sent help. Telani felt her silver skin pulse with emotion as she processed this information. The colonists gathered in the main square. As the ship landed, its cargo doors opened to reveal crates upon crates of food, medicine, and equipment. But more importantly, it revealed people. Dozens of humans emerged from the ship. Volunteers who had traveled across the galaxy to help strangers they had never met. At the front of the group was a woman in a captain's uniform who bore a striking resemblance to Commander San Deho. Myra, Deho called out, and his voice broke on the single word. Captain San. Myra crossed the square in quick strides and pulled her brother into a fierce embrace. "You thought I would let you starve out here," she said. "You thought any of us would." Talani watched as the two siblings held each other, surrounded by colonists who wept with relief and volunteers who immediately began unloading supplies. "I do not understand," Vrethik said, and his voice carried none of its usual certainty. "Why would they come? What do you mean?" "These volunteers," Vrethik gestured at the screen. "They have no connection to this colony. They gain nothing from helping. Many of them probably spent their entire savings on passage to get here. Why would they do this?" Talani looked at her colleague and saw something in his compound, eyes that she had never seen before, genuine confusion. Yes, but also something else, something that looked almost like wonder. "I believe you already know the answer," Talani said gently on the surface. Captain Myra was explaining the contents of her cargo to the gathered colonists. "We brought enough food to last 6 months," she said. "But more importantly, we brought these." She held up a small container filled with seeds. "Researchers on Earth have been working around the clock since we heard about the blight," Myra explained. "These seeds have been engineered to resist the disease. They should be able to grow even in contaminated soil." "How long until we know if they work?" Deho asked. "Months," his sister admitted. "But we will be here with you, however long it takes." A small hand tugged at Captain Myra's uniform. She looked down to find Yuna gazing up at her with serious eyes. "Are you my aunt?" the child asked Myra. Knelt down to meet her niece at eye level. "I am," she confirmed. "Your father has told me so much about you in his messages. Did he tell you about my stones?" Captain Myra smiled with a warmth that made Talani's emotional sensors glow. "He told me about your stones," she said. "He told me that you water them every day and that you never give up on them." "They have not grown yet," Yuna admitted. "But I think they will someday." "Do you know something?" Myra said. "I think you are right." The volunteers spread out through the colony over the following days, helping with repairs and distributing supplies. Talani observed dozens of interactions between colonists and rescuers, and each one filled her emotional sensors with warmth. But the moment that changed everything happened on the 5th night after the forest ship's arrival. Talani was reviewing data in her quarters when an alert drew her attention to the stone garden. Someone was there, in the darkness of the verdant 7th night, moving among the Theusitidur stones. She enhanced the image and felt her breath catch in her throat. It was Vrethik, the Kethrai scholar, stood in the middle of the children's garden, his angular form illuminated by the colony's emergency lights. He was holding something in his spindly fingers, a stone smooth and gray and utterly ordinary. As Talani watched, Vrethik knelt down and began to dig a small hole at the edge of the garden. Away from the children's stones, he placed his rock carefully in the hole. He covered it with dirt, and then he stood there for a long moment, staring down at what he had done. Talani knew she should say nothing. She knew that acknowledging this moment would embarrass her colleague and potentially damage their professional relationship. But she could not stay silent. "Vrethik." She spoke into the communication channel that connected to his personal device. "Would you like to talk about what you are doing?" The Kethri froze for a long moment. He did not respond. Then his voice came through the channel, quiet and confused. I do not know what I am doing, he admitted. I cannot explain it logically. There is no rational reason for this behavior. Then why did you do it? Another long pause. Because it felt necessary. Vrethik finally said, because I have watched these humans care for something that cannot grow. And I have seen how that caring has changed them, has connected them, has given them strength when they should have none. He looked up at the observation station, hidden in the dark sky above. I wanted to understand, he said. I thought if I did what they do, I might finally understand. And do you? Vrethik looked down at his stone. No, he said. But I think that is acceptable. I think understanding is not the point. Talani felt tears forming in her eyes. An emotional response she had not experienced in decades. What is the point then? She asked. I do not know yet, Vrethik replied. But I am going to water this stone tomorrow morning. And the morning after that, and perhaps eventually, the answer will come. He walked back toward the observation station, leaving his stone behind in the garden. 43 stones now. 42 placed by humans who believed in impossible things, and 1 placed by an alien who was just beginning to learn what belief meant. 6 months into the observation, Verdant 7 began to die. The blight arrived quietly at first. Just a few brown spots on the leaves of the colony's main food crops within 2 weeks. It had spread to every greenhouse and field on the planet. Talani watched the crisis unfold with growing horror as her emotional sensors detected waves of fear and despair washing through the human settlement. Galactic protocol is clear in situations like this, Vrethik said as he reviewed the emergency guidelines on his tablet. The colony should be evacuated to the nearest safe world. The humans can start over somewhere else. Have you informed them of this option? Talani asked. The council transmitted the offer yesterday. And their response, Vrethik's mandibles clicked with frustration. They refused, he said. They claim Verdant 7 is their home, and they will not abandon it. Elder Morvith of the Kethrai High Council arrived at the observation station that same afternoon. He was old even by Kethrai's standards. His exoskeleton faded to a dull gray. His compound eyes clouded with age, but his mind remained sharp. And his authority over the observation program was absolute. I have reviewed all reports from this station, Morvis said as he settled into the commander's chair. Scholar Vrethik, your assessment of human cognitive deficiency appears to be confirmed by their refusal to evacuate. Yes. Elder, and observer Talani, Morvis continued, turning his clouded eyes toward her. Your emotional data is interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. What good are feelings when a species cannot make rational decisions for its own survival? Talani wanted to argue, but she could not find the words. The humans were starving, their crops were dying, and they refused to leave. How could she defend that? On the observation screen, the colony had changed dramatically since the blight began. The once busy streets were quiet as colonists conserved energy. The greenhouses that had been full of growing plants now held only brown, withered stalks, but one small corner of the settlement remained exactly as it had always been. The children's stone garden had grown to 42 stones now, each one carefully placed and faithfully watered every single morning. This is what I find most disturbing, Morvith said, pointing at the screen where Yuna was performing her daily ritual. Their world is collapsing, and they continue this pointless behavior. Perhaps it is not pointless to them. Talani said quietly, It produces no food, Morvith replied. It generates no energy. It solves no problems. By any rational measure, it is a complete waste of time and resources. And yet they continue, which proves my point about their cognitive limitations. A commotion on the planet's surface drew their attention back to the main screen. A group of adult colonists had gathered near the stone garden, not to participate in the children's ritual, but simply to watch Dr. Bigjisu was there. Along with Commander San Deho and several other senior members of the colony, they stood in silence as the children watered their stones. "What are they doing?" Rethik asked. Talani checked her emotional sensors and felt her silver skin pulse with an unfamiliar warmth. "They are feeling hope," she said. "Despite everything, despite logic and evidence and their empty food stores, they are looking at these children and feeling hope. Hope in stones," Morvis said with contempt. "Hope in each other," Talani corrected. "Hope in the act of caring for something. Hope in the refusal to give up." Morvis dismissed this with a wave of his ancient hand. "I have seen enough," he declared. "I am ordering the immediate withdrawal of all observation personnel. Humans are incomprehensible and therefore irrelevant to galactic civilization. Elder, please," Talani began. "The decision is made." But before Morvith could issue the formal order, another alert flashed across their screens. There had been an accident in the colony's engineering section. A power coupling had exploded during emergency repairs, and 2 workers were badly injured. One of them was Senior Engineer Quan Taeyeon, Commander Deho's closest friend and partner in maintaining the colony's failing systems. Talani watched as Deho received the news. She felt his emotional signature shift from worry to shock to devastating grief as the medics informed him that Taeyeon would not survive his injuries. The commander stood frozen in the colony's main corridor, surrounded by people who wanted to help but did not know how. Then a small hand slipped into his. Yuna had found her father somehow, drawn to him through the crowd by an instinct that Talani's sensors could not explain. The child did not speak. She did not offer comfort or platitudes or logical assessments of the situation. She simply held her father's hand and led him outside. Talani tracked them as they walked through the dying colony, past the empty greenhouses and the silent machinery, until they reached the stone garden. Deho collapsed to his knees beside his daughter's original stone, the smooth gray rock that had started everything 6 months ago. And then the strongest man in the colony, the engineer who held everything together, the commander who never showed weakness, began to weep. Yuna sat beside him and put her small arms around his neck. She did not tell him it would be okay. She did not promise that things would get better. She just held him while he cried, a cheek pressed against his shoulder. Her eyes closed. Talani's emotional sensors detected something extraordinary in that moment. Grief. Yes, overwhelming and terrible, but beneath the grief, there was something else. A connection between father and daughter that transcended words or logic. A shared understanding that some things matter not because they make sense, but because they are human. Elder Morvith, Talani said quietly, "I cannot leave." The old Kethri turned to look at her with surprise. "You are refusing a direct order." "I am following a higher purpose," Talani replied. "These humans have shown me something that I have never seen in 40 years of emotional research. They have shown me faith." Faith. Morvith repeated the word like it tasted strange. "The belief in something without evidence," Talani explained. "The commitment to hope when hope makes no sense. The watering of stones because the act itself has meaning." She turned back to the screen where Deho was finally rising to his feet, his daughter's hand still clasped in his. "I do not know if I can explain it," Talani admitted. "I do not know if I fully understand it myself, but I know it is important, and I will not leave until I do." Morvith studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "You have 1 more month," he said. "Then I expect a full report explaining why I should care about a species that waters stones." He left the observation room with Rethik following close behind. Talani remained at her post, watching as the humans below continued their impossible struggle against a dying world. And in the stone garden, 42 gray rocks sat waiting in their holes, waiting to become something they could never be, or perhaps, Talani thought, they already had. 3 months had passed since Talani first observed the human child and her stone. The seasons on Verdant 7 moved faster than on most habitable worlds, and the warm growing period had given way to violent electrical storms that swept across the colony every few days. Rethik stood at the observation screen with his mandibles hanging slightly open in disbelief. "She is still doing it," he said. "Through wind and rain and lightning, she is still watering that stone." Talani nodded without looking up from her data tablet, where she was recording emotional patterns. "She has not missed a single day," the Narration confirmed. "And her emotional readings have grown more complex over time, not less." On the screen, little Yuna trudged through mud that came up past her ankles. The morning storm had just passed, and the sky still flickered with distant lightning. Her father walked behind her, holding an umbrella over her head. Even though the rain had already stopped, the child reached her stone garden, which had grown since the observation began. 17 small holes now surrounded her original stone, each containing a similar smooth rock placed there by other colony children. "Explain this to me," Rethik demanded. "I can almost understand one child having a delusion, but now there are 17 of them participating in this ritual." 18, Talani corrected. "Young Junho Kim added his stone yesterday. The behavior is spreading like a disease." A soft chime indicated they had a visitor, and Liaison Korath of the Velthari Diplomatic Corps entered the observation room. The reptilian diplomat was tall and covered in scales of deep green that shifted to black at the edges. His people were known throughout the galaxy for their strict pragmatism and their absolute rejection of anything that could not be measured or proven. "I am here to review your progress," Korath announced, his forked tongue flickering as he spoke. "The Council grows impatient with the resources being allocated to human observation." Rethik eagerly pulled up his reports and data summaries. "As you will see, Liaison, my findings support a significant reduction in observation efforts." But Korath's cold eyes had already found the live feed from the planet's surface. He watched as Yuna carefully poured water on each of the 18 stones while the other children stood nearby, waiting their turn with their own small cups. "What am I witnessing?" Korath asked. "Human cognitive failure in action," Rethik replied proudly. "The children believe these stones will grow into plants, and the adults permit this. They encourage it, as if to prove his point." The screen showed Dr. Beek Jisu, the colony's head botanist, approaching the children's garden. She was carrying a small device that measured soil moisture, a tool she used in her actual gardens, where real seeds grew into real plants. "Look," Rethik said. "Even their scientists participate in the delusion." But as they watched, Dr. Beek did not mock the children or explain their error. Instead, she knelt beside Yuna and showed her how to use the moisture device. "You want to make sure the soil is damp, but not too wet," the botanist explained. "Even the strongest seeds can drown if we give them too much water." "Does that mean I have been doing it wrong?" Yuna asked with sudden worry. "Not at all," Dr. Beek replied with a warm smile. "You have been doing it exactly right. I just thought you might want to be more precise. Like a real scientist." Yuna's face lit up with joy as she accepted the device and began checking the moisture around each stone. Korath turned away from the screen, with disgust evident in every scale on his face. "This is absurd," he declared. "You are wasting council resources observing a species that cannot tell the difference between a stone and a seed." "My assessment exactly," Rethik agreed. "I disagree," Talani said softly. And both males turned to look at her with surprise. "You disagree with a Velthari liaison?" Korath asked with a dangerous edge to his voice. "I disagree with the conclusion," Talani clarified. "We are witnessing something we do not understand, and declaring it worthless simply because we do not understand it seems premature." She pulled up her own data on the main screen. The emotional readings from these children are unlike anything in our databases, she explained. When they water their stones, they do not feel doubt or confusion or embarrassment. They feel connected to each other, to their colony, to something larger than themselves. Feelings are not data, Korath replied coldly. For a Narration, feelings are the only data that matters. Before Korath could respond, an alert flashed across the observation system. A severe storm was approaching the colony, far worse than the usual weather patterns on the surface. Colonists began rushing toward the central shelter as the sky turned an angry purple, but the children remained in their garden. Looking at their stones with worried expressions, Commander San Deo emerged from the shelter and called to them, everyone inside. Now, the other children ran toward safety. But Yuna hesitated. What about the stones? She called back. The storm will wash them away. Any rational parent would have grabbed their child and forced them to shelter. Deho looked at the approaching storm, then at his daughter's terrified face, then at the small patch of muddy ground that held so much meaning to her. Wait here, he told the other children at the shelter door. He jogged through the rising wind to his daughter's side. Together, they quickly gathered the largest stones they could find and built a small wall around the garden. The rain began falling in sheets as they worked. By the time they reached the shelter, both of them were soaked and muddy and shivering, but Yuna was smiling. We saved them, she whispered to her father. We saved them, he agreed in the observation room. Korath watched this scene with an expression of utter incomprehension. He risked his child's safety for rocks. The Velthari said, this species is not merely inefficient. They are dangerous. I will recommend immediate termination of all observation programs, Korath continued. Clearly humans are not worth our time or resources. But Talani was not listening to him. She was focused on her emotional sensors, which were detecting something extraordinary across the entire colony. In the shelter were hundreds of humans huddled together waiting out the storm. She could feel a wave of warmth spreading from person to person. It began with Yuna, moved to her father, and then rippled outward like light, spreading through darkness. They were all thinking about the stone garden, not because they believed stones could grow, but because a child's hope had become there. Hope and somehow impossibly. That made them stronger. I request permission to continue observation, Telani said quietly. Korath's scale shifted with annoyance. Request denied, he said. I want final reports submitted within the week. He left the room without another word. Vrethik turned to Telani with something almost like sympathy in his compound eyes. I am sorry, he said. I know you believed there was something worth studying here. Telani did not respond. She simply watched the screen where, in the shelter below, 17 children had gathered around Yuna to hear her describe how she and her father had protected their garden, and one by one, other colonists drew closer to listen, not because the story made sense, but because it made them feel something they needed to feel. Scholar Vrethik pressed his compound eyes against the observation screen and felt his mandibles click with frustration. For the third time that morning, the human child was doing it again, 7 years old by their primitive counting system, and already displaying the cognitive failures that made humans such a puzzle to the Galactic Council. Talani, he called to his partner across the sterile white observation room. Come witness this and tell me what emotional reading you detect. The Narration analyst floated over on her hoverpad, her silver skin shimmering as she processed the ambient emotional data from the planet below. They were stationed on Observation Post 17, a small satellite hidden in the upper atmosphere of Verdant 7, a human frontier colony on the edge of explored space. The Galactic Council had maintained watch posts near human settlements for nearly 200 years now, ever since the strange species had stumbled into Galactic. civilization and immediately defied every behavioral model the Council had developed. Over 10,000 years of studying intelligent life. Telani's wide black eyes focused. On the screen where a small human girl knelt in the red dirt of the colony garden. Her name is Una Park, Telani said softly, and she is experiencing something I cannot fully identify. She is experiencing delusion. Rethik replied with another click of his mandibles. Watch what she does on the screen. Little Una carefully poured water from a dented metal cup onto a smooth gray stone sitting in a small hole she had dug. With her bare hands, she patted the wet dirt around the stone with great care and whispered words to it that even their advanced listening devices could not quite capture. She believes it is a seed, Rethik explained. She found this stone 3 days ago and became convinced it would grow into a plant if she cared for it properly. As no adult corrected her understanding, Telani asked, "That is the most disturbing element of this case," Rethik said, pulling up additional footage on a secondary screen. The recording showed a tall human male kneeling beside Una in the garden. This was Commander Sandeho, her father, chief engineer of the Verdant 7 colony, and by all accounts a highly intelligent member of his species, Una. The recording of Deho said gently, "You know, that is just a rock, right? It wants to be a seed," the child replied with absolute certainty. "It told me. Any rational species would have firmly corrected this cognitive error. The Kethrai, Rethik's own people, would have immediately provided evidence and logical explanation until the child understood reality. The Velthri would have simply removed the stone and ended the confusion. Even the empathic Morotians would have guided the child's emotions toward acceptance of truth, but Commander Sandeho did something that made Rethik's logical mind ache with confusion. He smiled at his daughter and said, "Then we better make sure it gets enough water." The recording ended and Rethik turned to Telani with what could only be described as exhausted bewilderment. He encouraged the delusion, Rethik said. A trained scientist and engineer actively supported his offspring's break from reality. Telani remained quiet for a long moment. Her silver fingers pressed together in a Morotian gesture of deep contemplation. The emotional signature is unusual. She finally said, "The child does not feel confused or uncertain, which are the typical readings we detect when a being holds a false belief." "What does she feel then?" "I am not entirely certain," Telani admitted. "There is warmth, and there is determination, and there is something else beneath those surface emotions that I have never encountered in any species we have studied." Rethik made a dismissive sound with his throat spiracles. "Humans are barely 300 years into space travel," he said. "They are children among the stars, and their cognitive development clearly reflects this immaturity." He began composing his preliminary report to the Galactic Council, his spindly fingers moving across the holographic keyboard with practiced speed. Species 7421. Subset human. Continues to display significant cognitive deficiencies, he dictated as he typed. Observed specimen. Juvenile female designation Una Park. Demonstrates inability to distinguish between organic and inorganic matter and shows no signs of self-correction. Perhaps we should observe longer before submitting conclusions. Telani suggested, "What more is there to observe?" Rethik replied. "The child waters a stone and believes it will grow, and her parents allow this foolishness to continue. This is sufficient data to support my assessment." But Telani moved closer to the observation screen and watched as Una finished her morning ritual. The child stood up and brushed the red dirt from her knees. She looked down at her stone with an expression that made Telani's empathic senses pulse with unfamiliar energy. "I will be back tomorrow," Una whispered to the stone. "Do not worry, I will not forget you." Then she ran off toward the colony's central building where other children were gathering for their morning lessons. Talani watched her go and felt something stir in her chest that she had not experienced in her 40 years of emotional research. "Rethik," she said quietly, "I would like to request extended observation of this subject." The Kethri scholar looked up from his report with surprise. "Extended observation of a child watering a rock?" he asked. "For what possible purpose?" "Because I believe we are missing something important," Talani replied. "Humans have survived and thrived in conditions that should have destroyed them. They have built colonies on worlds that our own species deemed uninhabitable. They have recovered from disasters that would have broken the spirit of any other civilization. Yes, through luck and stubbornness," Rethik said dismissively. "Perhaps," Talani agreed. "But what if their stubbornness comes from the same place as this child's belief in her stone? What if the behavior we call cognitive failure is actually something else entirely?" Rethik considered this for a moment before shaking his angular head. "You Martians and your emotional hypotheses," he said. "Very well, I will delay my final report for 1 standard month. But I expect you will reach the same conclusion I have already reached." He transmitted his preliminary assessment to the Council database. Species 7421 displays cognitive deficiencies, suggesting limited potential for advancement. Recommend reduced observation resources. Talani read the report as it uploaded and felt a rare flash of irritation toward her colleague. She turned back to the observation screen and found Yuna again, now sitting in a classroom with other human children, learning mathematics and science and all the rational subjects that should have taught her that stones do not grow. But Talani could still feel the warmth radiating from the child's emotional core. It was steady and bright, like a small sun that refused to dim regardless of logic or evidence. "What are you?" Talani whispered to herself as she watched the human child. "What are any of you?" Outside the colony, the red winds of Verdant 7 blew across the garden and ruffled the dirt around Yuna's stone. The stone sat in its hole, smooth and gray and utterly lifeless. But tomorrow morning, the child would return, and she would water it again, because somewhere in her small human heart, she believed it mattered.